Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind, episode 106.
An obstacle is not between you and your education. An obstacle is not between you and learning or reaching a learning goal. An obstacle is an opportunity to continue to learn.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Tim Milosch. Tim was homeschooled from kindergarten through high school at a time when homeschooling was a developing educational strategy. Without the resources available to homeschoolers today, Tim and his parents developed a lot of curriculum on their own. When it came time for college, Tim leveraged the research abilities his homeschooling experience gave him to organize an effective college search and financial aid package that allowed him to attend Biola University, a private Christian college. Post-college, Tim embarked on a career as a secondary school teacher in the Christian education, in addition to gaining a master's degree from Regent University and getting accepted to a PhD program at Claremont Graduate University. Currently, Tim works at Biola University as a course designer, an adjunct professor, a debate coach, in addition to writing the College-Bound Homeschoolers blog. Welcome, Tim.
Hi, Rebecca. Thanks for having me.
This is going to be an awesome conversation because I think you're going to help us destroy some of the myths, hopefully, that people have about college and homeschooling and all of those things. So why don't we get started with you telling our audience a little bit more about yourself, kind of fill in the holes of what the bio missed.
Okay, yeah, sure. I think, if anything, what the bio says in terms of my experience is that I love learning and I love ideas, talking about them, implementing them, and working them out in everyday life. I mean, I just think learning is one of the most powerful tools anyone can have at their disposal. And so learning to learn well is something you can take with you into any area of life. And so that's why I think just working in the education world has been really appealing to me over the last several years. That
is really fun. So now it says in your bio that you were homeschooled from kindergarten, all the way through. Do you know why your parents chose to homeschool you?
Yeah, I think there was a couple of things. One, they were concerned about the quality of public schools in the area where I grew up in. And at the time, they weren't entirely that great. And they also, my family was a Christian family, and they wanted to be sure that they built Christian values and education into that. And so the obvious option, if you weren't going to public school, would be to go to a Christian private school. But for my family, that was going to be too expensive. So the option, to hear my dad tell it, would be something along the lines of, so that made the decision easy. We didn't want to go public school, couldn't afford private school. Homeschooling was option 3, and that's what we went with. So that's probably an oversimplified version of it, but essentially it was a combination of all those things. Where we lived, the economics, the faith aspect, and all those things played a role, I think, in the decision to homeschool. And by the time I got to high school, especially by the time I hit my sophomore year, it really was a point where I wanted to homeschool. I wanted to stay there because I really enjoyed what I was doing.
That's awesome. Sometimes you hear that that's not the case, that they want to go back, but that's fun. I mean, obviously we talked about you loved education. That's why you're doing what you're doing now. So can you tell me how you feel like your educational philosophies changed over time and with your experience? How has that paradigm changed?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think when I was growing up and being homeschooled, the paradigm of education was definitely a sense of you learn how to learn. And if you learn how to learn well, then you're going to be able to learn anything.
Yeah, sky's the limit.
Yeah, and with that, because usually when most people think about education, they're thinking about learning about a subject, right?
Yeah.
Learn about math, learn about science, learn about history. And people don't always pick up that undergirding all of that is more or less the same learning process.
That's true. It really is.
So my education paradigm, as it has grown from homeschooling and then being a teacher in a classroom and running into some of that thinking of, oh, I'm learning a subject, I'm not learning how to learn, has more or less been a dawning awareness for me and a developing of that paradigm that learning happens, or the key to learning well is to just know how your brain learns, know how your brain functions, know how you develop and validate ideas. And so I used to be someone who really thought that to learn, you have to just learn a lot, and I thought more of as a consumer. I had to consume a lot of information, and part of learning well meant learning a lot about a lot of different things. And while there might be some merit to that, where I've landed now is that it's not about consuming a lot of information about a lot of different things, although that certainly can be helpful. But where I've landed now is that learning to learn well is something that is more along the lines of an intentional strategy of knowing and understanding what you need to know, what you need to learn, and then having a conscientious plan of pursuing that.
Yeah, kind of following your own desire. Is that what I'm getting out of that? Like your own interest type of thing? Or
well, even beyond your own personal interest, certainly I am definitely an advocate of people having individual personal learning goals. In fact, I walk through that with my college students all the time. I mean, rather than go through the syllabus at the first day of class, we go through, what do you want to get out of this class? However, I think, there are some aspects of life where we are required to learn things.
Yeah, that's true.
But the same approach can be applied. Even if I'm required to take X class, I can still walk into that class and say, okay, what am I working towards? And what am I interested in this class? And how can I move towards that while at the same time successfully completing this requirement, whether that's a high school class, a college class, or even a continuing education class for a professional?
Well, and do you think kind of having an idea of the goals that you have in mind for that particular class or that particular subject, because especially when you get into college, I mean, they basically say this is what you need to learn in order to get this degree, Mm-hmm. Do you feel like having that specific goal, even though it may not be necessarily something you want to learn, you're able to grasp the information and retain it? And because we hear of kids that study, just to pass the test, and then they just plurge the information.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something that I go over with my college students is, okay, so I teach a public speaking course at Biola University. And so it's all about how do you give a speech, how do you prepare a speech, and how do you deliver it effectively. And those are my objectives for the course, and that's stated on the syllabus, is you will learn how to give a speech, you will learn how to do the research for a speech, etc. But before I go there, I realized that studies show that people were really scared and nervous about speaking in public. In fact, some time ago, there was a study that concluded that people were more fearful of speaking in public than of death.
Yeah, it's like the number one fear or something.
Right. As Jerry Seinfeld said, you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. So... So what I do is I start with that, and I recognize that fear is there. And so rather than telling my students, okay, you're going to learn this, or this is what I want you to learn, I start with, okay, what do you hope to get out of this class, and what's your goal for this class? How do you see this class fitting in with your educational progress? Because if I don't do that, two things are going to happen. One, my students are going to approach the class as just, the next general education class that they need to check off on the way to the degree and on the way to doing what they really want to do. So they're not going to get any value out of it. It's just
they're going to kind of check out type of thing.
Yeah, it's just going to be a T to cross and I to dot, which I think is a horrible way to live if you're going to just go through life sitting through things that you don't want to really be in. So that's the first reason why I have them do that. And the second reason I have them do that is I realize that for a subject that for many people can be a cause of nervousness and anxiety, I need to have some buy-in from the students. They have to feel personally invested and recognize that something that I offer, even if it's just one thing, something that I offer in that course will be of help to them and will develop them as an individual. And so that's why I do it. So I recommend, after I walk through, and I have this whole exercise planned out with students where we do that, after I walk them through that, I encourage my students, do this with every single one of your classes, whether your professor says something or not. Like, go do it. Establish whatever the course may be. What can I learn from this course? And invariably, I have found that students who take the time to do that get more out of the course and find that they got more out of the course. They learned something.
Wow, that's such a powerful teaching method that I'm sure follows them, for the rest of their college experience. Hopefully they get you fairly early in the process.
Well, it's a freshman level course, but so they usually do, but every once in a while some senior has put it off to the very last. But it doesn't really matter whether it comes in at the beginning or the end. If I can get students to learn that one part, I think I've moved them in the direction of being what I call lifelong learners, which
Awesome.
I think is the ultimate goal.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you on that. So I mean, speaking of different challenges and stuff that you have or students have, what would you say some of the biggest obstacles you face are? And can you share with us what you've learned from those obstacles?
Yeah, well, I think in general, when it comes to obstacles, especially in education and learning, since that's kind of where my expertise is, at least on this level, is that an obstacle is still a learning opportunity. It's not, an obstacle is not between you and your education. An obstacle is not between you and learning or reaching a learning goal. An obstacle is an opportunity to continue to learn.
That is true. And like even failure, failure it allows you to learn something, even though it may be frustrating.
Right. And as the old saying goes, failure can be, necessity and failure together are the mother of invention in many ways. I think I just rephrased that saying. The saying is necessity is the mother of invention, but I think you can reword it and put failure there too. Failure is the mother of invention. It really does push people towards rethinking and developing different approaches. I mean, just looking at my own homeschooling experience, when we were talking about earlier and about why my parents chose to homeschool us, there were certain obstacles that were in the way for my parents of getting or creating the type of education they wanted their children to have. Homeschooling was an alternative option that they went with. And so that was how an obstacle became the learning tool, literally became the learning tool, because the obstacle turned them into homeschooling, and it's been benefiting me and my education ever since. So, I mean, I guess the lesson to take away there is to not discount an obstacle as such, but it can actually be contributing to developing your learning. But for me, when it comes to just education, my experiences going from homeschooling, one of the biggest obstacles for me that actually I think pushed me towards becoming a better teacher was being a K through 12 homeschooler, going to college. And then my first job out of college was to be a high school teacher.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, educationally, I had the knowledge for the job. Experientially, I was stepping into an environment that I had only ever observed from the outside. I guess you'd say the typical high school environment where you have classrooms and classes and pep rallies and proms. I joke with people that, the first prom I ever attended was the one I chaperoned. But for me, that was a bit of an obstacle, not in the negative sense that it was a source of stress, but it really became this sense of, okay, I need to learn to adapt this love of learning that I developed as a homeschooler and this sense of what it means to learn. I need to adapt that for a traditional high school environment where I have a large group of students who are sitting in a room and expecting me to teach them something. I mean, that is a very different approach to learning than most homeschooling is. But I saw a lot of value in homeschooling. I recognized that homeschooling had given me a lot of great benefits. And so the obstacle for me was, how do I translate this stuff?
Yeah.
It was literally a experience of, I guess you could say, educationally speaking, cross-cultural communication, where I was going from one educational culture to another, and I was trying to translate certain concepts and values from one to the other. And that proved, especially in the first couple of years as I was learning to be a high school teacher, that proved to be a real challenge. But I think it also gave me a deep appreciation for both traditional and non-traditional modes of education. And so I was learning to take the best of both worlds, use the high school classroom as a platform to leverage some of the more valuable pieces of learning and understanding the learning process that I picked up from homeschooling.
Wow, what an absolute, talk about paradigm change,
Oh, yeah.
And then, like you said, taking that obstacle to what you learned. And so, well, yeah. I love how you talked about using an obstacle to help you that is the challenge. And I think that really is a nice segue into what you're doing now, the services that you're offering families. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about those?
Yeah, so what I do with the College-Bound Homeschooler blog is kind of the front end of that, and it's really just me trying to pour everything I've picked up in my years of education to kind of bring together the knowledge I've gained and appreciation for homeschooling, combine it with the knowledge I've gained as a classroom teacher, a high school teacher, and now that I work at a college and I've gone through many college application and admissions processes.
Well, and I think, too, your speech teaching, I guess.
Right.
I mean, wow, what a way to help implement that into what you're doing with that blog, too.
Right, yeah. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take all that information and I'm trying to fuse it together into one resource for homeschool families who are contemplating college, and to give them some very straightforward, constructive, this is what you can expect information and advice. So the College-Bound Homeschooler blog is kind of, I guess you could say, the free end and the front end of what I do there. But the other services I offer are, one-on-one consulting with families to help them strategize how to approach homeschooling high school and going towards college admissions, because that's a challenge for many homeschooling families. High school looks intimidating, and it doesn't have to be, but it can be. And so I want to offer my services as someone who can help them walk through that. And then that's the one-on-one consulting, but I also offer working with homeschooling groups to do workshops based on specific topics. So if they need a workshop for, how do we set up a college admissions process, or how do we do research for college? What's financial aid? Doing stuff like that. And so those are the primary services I offer, mostly consultative services.
Wow. Kind of speaking before we started recording, we were talking about how I really felt like your services could translate to maybe students. I mean, what we're seeing in higher ed right now, is how are kids getting in, and then how are they, do you think that could translate to those traditional students that you are working with too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, talking with students in general, like I said at the very beginning when you asked me a little bit about myself, is I love the process of learning and creating strategies to learn. And when I would talk to my high school students in the traditional high school classroom, one of the things that I did recognize both with homeschooling families, which is what prompted me to start this blog, but also in talking to my traditional high school students, is everybody gets stressed out by the college application process. Everybody gets stressed out by it. And what I started to recognize, though, is that, or a big cause of that stress for parents and students, whether they were homeschoolers or not, a big cause of that stress was just they often, started thinking about it too late.
Yeah.
So we're thinking like maybe the early ones were thinking about it during their junior year of high school, and then all of a sudden summer before senior year hits and everyone's like, oh my gosh, what happened? But I mean, if you're starting there, that's far too late. And then the second thing that was causing stress is people were unfamiliar with what the college admissions process looked like. So they were going into the process without a strategy, without really knowing what they were looking for. And when you don't know what you're looking for, you think you have to look at everything, and then people just melted down. That was a common problem that I thought, well, I understand the learning process. I understand research. I understand setting up a strategy. I think I can help here. And that was the genesis of the blog in that sense.
Well, and kind of what I think you're saying is that people have a lot of myths about, what they think all that entails. Do you kind of want to break that down for us and give us some of those, some of the things, I mean, we kind of touched on it, but some of the things that they struggle with, and what are some common myths that people have about homeschooling with college or even like traditional school? I mean, we used to look at the GPA as a big deal.
Sure.
Is that still a big deal? I mean, what are some of those things? Break it down for us.
Yeah. That's actually a great comment that you make, is that when people get stressed out about that process, a lot of it is based on false assumptions or myths, as you say. And I think that's absolutely right. It's people through no fault of their own. I mean, they just make that assumption and then they don't stop to validate it. So yeah, I think a common myth is that numbers are the thing that matter. And there's two dominant numbers, your GPA and your SAT or ACT test score. Now, I don't want to belittle those scores because they absolutely do matter. But I've met a lot of students who think that that's the only thing that matters. And that can't be further from the truth. If you look at college admissions offices all across the country, there is a very subtle theme and distinction that comes up in what they ask or what they're looking for in prospective students, and that is they are looking for people who can demonstrate that they are self-starting, self-disciplined learners who start things.
Wow. Well, and that might be why we see so many headlines, at least I have seen a lot, of how colleges are actually like courting homeschoolers, because it tends to come a little more naturally in a homeschooling setting because a child hasn't grown up with a teacher right in front of them. Do you think that that's true, or?
Yes. No, that's absolutely one of the reasons why. I was actually talking with Brian Ricks on the 101 Homeschooling Ideas podcast a few weeks ago, and he was saying that he had been talking to some admissions professionals in trying to remember the college. It was one of the Ohio universities, and they were saying something similar. And that was something that I was in contact with Duke, MIT, and Yale a few weeks ago, doing some research on a blog post that I put up. And they said similar things. One of the things that makes homeschooling students attractive is that they can show pretty strong evidence of having what I call started something. And by started something, I mean started something like a business, or started something like a nonprofit. And when you compare that to maybe a traditional student coming out of a traditional high school, that student might say something on their resume like, oh, I started a club at my school, or I was the president of a club at my school. Great accomplishments, especially with some clubs or honor societies that may have, be part of national affiliations or groups. Those are accomplishments in and of themselves. But when you compare that to a student who went out of their way to start something from scratch that they were solely responsible for, like a business or something like that, I mean, there's just such a qualitative difference in terms of what that says about the student and their abilities as a self-starting learner. Wow. And that's something that's entirely very attractive to admissions offices at universities.
Before we go on, let us take a minute and hear about our sponsors. Changing a paradigm takes some study, but like me, you are probably super busy. That's why we've teamed up with Audible. Go to our website, theluminousmind.net, get a free month of Audible with 2 audiobooks, thousands of titles in exchange for only books that you absolutely love. You too can be learning on the go to keep that fire burning. Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with Tim Milosch from the College-Bound Homeschooler. Well, and we used to hear, as I'm a traditional school child, we used to hear like, oh, well, you want to be in, a variety of things. You want to be in band, you want to be in, and that worries me, as a mother of homeschooled kids now, it worries me of like, well, what are they going to, what are some of those things that they can kind of quantify the same way?
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I think that is a relevant question, because that, unfortunately, I think is, and this is my personal opinion, so it's not necessarily, I would say, objective reality, but it can appear as a bit of a double standard in college admissions. And I think this can be a source of stress for parents and students, is they get the message of, well, my student has to have a fleshed out resume. They have to be involved in a lot, and that takes up a lot of time, and that gets really stressful. But on the other hand, colleges will say something like, we're looking for quality, not quantity. And so it can be a real panic of, which is it? Do you want quality over quantity, or do you want my student to be involved in X, Y, and Z? But I think it's safe to say, and I think this is an objective statement, it's safe to say that most colleges are going to look for quality over quantity when looking at what students do and what they're a part of. And I think for homeschoolers and for homeschooling parents, that should be something they should look at, is what is the quality of what my student is doing in their extracurriculars. That being said, in homeschooling, extracurriculars have expanded greatly beyond when I was in homeschooling. I mean, now you have homeschooling sports leagues, you have homeschooling debate leagues, you have, which, by the way, quick plug, if you want something that really stands out on a resume or a college application, speech and debate.
Wow. So
that
really
is something
work on those.
Yes. And luckily for homeschoolers, that's practically, their version of high school football. I mean, homeschoolers love the speech and debate thing. And so if you get involved in a homeschool speech and debate league, that's something that is quite helpful when it comes to college admissions, because oral communication and effective communication is one of the most sought after skills by employers right now. And nothing says I know something about communication than speech and debate. And so for colleges, and then after colleges for employers, the knowledge that that person has done that, has competed in speech and debate, is something that is highly valued.
Wow, that's some great advice. Thank you. So have we covered all the myths then? I mean, one of the myths, I guess, is that homeschoolers are backwards. Which
Yeah.
You're just talking about speech and debate.
Yeah. I think that is interesting because, for some people who might be like, what? How could you replace high school football with speech and debate? I just use that to say that, different groups do have different things that they emphasize. A myth about homeschoolers is that somehow they're socially awkward and everything like that. But there have been so many studies that have been done to show that homeschoolers are right up there with their peers in terms of their sociability and their ability to engage. In most cases, and I don't know if this has been quantitatively demonstrated in a study, but certainly at the level of anecdotal studies and experiences, a lot of people will speak to the ability of homeschool students seem to be better able to engage with a broader variety of people. So maybe they're not always experts at engaging with their immediate peer group, but certainly with other age groups, they're very good at engaging. And we have found that, and when I was teaching at a small private school, we found this with our students as well, is that our students, when they were at a smaller school or in a smaller learning environment where they had to engage with more adults on a more personal level, that made them more effective communicators with their professors once they got to college. Yeah. And because that idea of a small education environment where you're interacting with a lot of adults on a personal level, I mean, that's exactly what homeschooling is. So whether it's homeschooling or whether it's small, private schools, students who are learning in that environment usually have a much more effective ability to engage in the adult world of the university, because that's something that is also another myth. I should go back to myths really quickly. That's a myth about college, is that people think it's some, I don't know,
outgrow of high school or
something like that. It's an extension of adolescence or something, but it is the first major step into the adult world, and that is often an assumption that professors and administrative staff at colleges make, is that you are adults and you are going to take responsibility and act like adults. And I think it's good that they make that assumption, but it also throws a lot of students off, and it makes the first semester or even the first year a real struggle for some newly minted high school grads. But again, that's where students coming from homeschooling or small private education environments are often better equipped for that adjustment because they've been engaging with adults at that level for much longer.
Yeah. Maybe some of those professors are getting tired of the whole, college beer party kind of attitude that's going on.
Right. And that's another common myth, too, about the party school. And there certainly are schools that have that reputation. But by and large, I have found that to be not entirely true for most schools. I mean, if you want to find a party scene at a school, you're going to find a party scene at a school.
Exactly.
And every school
you find what you look for, what you're looking for.
Exactly. And some schools have it more apparent and public than others. But at the same time, the university is still a place for learning, and many students still go there to learn. And I think that that's something that a lot of parents can take a degree of comfort in, is that if you've trained your student or your child to enjoy learning and to understand that the university is an incredible opportunity where you can go to expand your learning, and that's a value unto itself, I think they can be okay that their students are not going to get into too much trouble on the party end of things.
Yeah, well, and hopefully you've raised them, with that character to be able to make good choices when they're alone.
Right, exactly.
So, all right, so we've covered some myths. Do you want to cover maybe some norms of what homeschoolers can expect when they go to college?
Yeah.
What do colleges kind of all have in common, maybe?
I think I would start with going back to the idea of you're now assumed to be an adult. And that is, I think, the single biggest aspect of culture shock that can nail any new college student arriving on campus. And like I said, I think homeschoolers are a little better equipped to handle that. But even if you're equipped to handle it, that doesn't mean that it's going to be a smooth transition or that it's just going to be, oh, yeah, I've been here before. There's always a bit of a learning curve when going into college, and that, I think, is universal across college experiences. You go into college, you set foot in the college classroom the first day, there is, and you can even see it on the faces of students, there is this sense of, wow, I am in a completely new and foreign environment, and they are just sponges soaking in the experience. And so I think for homeschoolers approaching college, that's something to expect, is that one, you're going to be entering an environment where you are assumed to be an adult, and therefore you are expected to take responsibility for your decisions and your actions as an adult. And three, I think the other major norm is that within that environment of adults, learning looks a lot different. And what happens in the classroom is going to be just a unique learning environment because of that. You're no longer learning as a child. You're learning as an adult. You're learning in terms of not, do I need to know this so I can go to college? Well, now you're at college. You're learning this because now you have the sense of you're learning it for the rest of your life. And that changes the perspective. And I think those things are some pretty common norms across colleges in terms of how a student engages and interacts with it in their first experience, and particularly in their first year.
That's great. So, and kind of going along with what students can expect, we kind of were talking about this before we started recording, but kind of what's happening anymore is people are really starting to question, especially with the cost and everything, if college really is worth it. Mm-hmm. And then how do you help? Once we've decided if it's really worth it, how can you help? What have you done to help in the past, maybe with scholarships or with different things like that? Yeah,
I think those are two really good questions. Is college, in fact, worth it? And if we have established that college is worth it, how do we go about affording it?
Yeah, you hear these horror stories of kids coming out of what we expect. What I was taught is like, you go to college, that's your pathway to a good job. That's your pathway to a better life. Is that really the truth anymore?
Yeah, I think, yes and no. I think, let's start there. So, yes, going to college, getting a college education is, generally speaking, still a path to a good job. Studies have been done to show that in most cases, students with a college education are going to, over their professional career, earn more than someone with just a high school education. Now, some studies have been done to show that that's not the case with every college major, though.
That's true.
So some college majors will lead to better paying jobs than others. And that's why I usually tell people when you're thinking about college costs, if you're going for a college, for a post-college career and therefore a college major that is in one of those higher paying areas, then the cost of college, while certainly an immediate concern, it does kind of reduce the seriousness of that. However, college can look a lot more expensive if all you can expect with your degree and the job field you go into is, X level of salary, and it's not that much more than a year of tuition at your college kind of thing. So in that sense, you might want to rethink, going to fancy, ritzy private school. So in that sense...
Yeah, that's another myth, I think, is that do you have to go... we hear of people all the time, they get accepted to some expensive private school, or they get... do you have to go to those in order to get a better job versus just like, a state university?
Yeah, and then that's speaking to something that most people don't talk about. When you talk about that, that's not necessarily speaking to the school or the degree program you're in. That's speaking to the network of people that you get connected to by virtue of going to that school. So when we talk about brand name schools like the Ivy Leagues or Berkeley or Stanford, the value of that education is not just in going to the school and having that name on your resume. The value of that education is the professors you're going to be learning under and the access to internships and extracurricular programs and ultimately alumni networks that you'll have going out.
So and pretty much what you make out of it, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't use those things, it's not going to be worth the money. Exactly. Because those networks are going to be very big and helpful if you use them properly in moving you towards those possibly more profitable job opportunities and career fields. So I think that's why I say it's yes and no. Yes, college is still worth it. However, you do have to bear in mind what you plan to go into, and you also have to bear in mind how you're going to use your college experience. It's not just, I got into this college, therefore the rest of my life is set in an easy ride. You have to be proactive, you have to have that strategy, and you have to take responsibility for your own learning, which is why I think it's really important that students learn to be lifelong learners, because that's what's going to help them take advantage and recognize those opportunities that their colleges give them, whichever college they go to. Now, getting back to what we were talking about as we entered into this is college still worth it? Like I said, I think it is. However, it is changing. Non-traditional opportunities of education and learning, doing college all online versus not, is giving people the opportunity to do college and work at the same time. So this idea that somehow you have to take 4 years off of your life to go to college with a bunch of student loans and all
that is starting to fade to the background a little bit as how to do it. So, but I think that's actually going to contribute to far from a fading of college as a valuable thing. It's actually going to contribute to people understanding the value of college differently.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's actually a good thing. I think it's going to I think as online education gets more effective and becomes better able to address the economics of education and able to become more affordable and give people the ability to educate themselves even while they're working or raising a family or anything like that, it's actually going to increase its value or contribute to its sense of value as opposed to decrease from it. Now, the traditional four-year college is also of value, but what we haven't talked, the other avenues people can take in furthering their education after high school. And some of those avenues often get talked down, but they're usually pretty effective at setting people up for further career. And that's things like going to trade schools, which often are looked down upon as this, this thing that you do as a fallback. But the fact of the matter is, universities are built by welders and literally physically built by welders, contractors, electricians, people who in many cases have gone to trade schools. Trade schools are another valuable way of advancing one's education past high school. And, some people choose to opt to go to the military before they go to a four-year college. And that's another education of an entirely different kind, but it's still a valuable education in many senses in terms of preparing people for a professional life and a professional career. So the traditional four-year college may not be the only option after high school. I mean, we were talking about myths earlier. Maybe that's another myth that we should consider when thinking about life post high school, is that the four-year college is not the only option.
Route for everybody.
Is not the only option, nor does it have to be the immediate option.
That kind of goes back to what colleges are looking for, is that self-starter. I think too many students really discount what that life experience can teach them. Versus the traditional school. So and that's why in some cases, I'll just add this, that's why in some cases, especially in Europe, students will take what's called a gap year, where they, before going to university, they take a year off from formal schooling to work, travel, do internships, etc., and then they go back to university. And that's something that isn't often talked about in American education, but for many students, particularly if they have to, learn to be adults before going to college, in order to value that college experience, that might be a good option. That's some great advice. Thank you. So, speaking of, your website and stuff, what successes have you seen with students and stuff that you've worked with?
Actually, at this point, I haven't directly seen. The website is just a year old, so I wouldn't say I've been able to see a overwhelming success at this point. I'm still working on building that. Although I will say probably the biggest success I've started to see is evidence of my readers saying that this is giving them clarity in how they're thinking about college and how they're moving forward.
Yeah, they're less fearful maybe in the future.
Yeah.
So.
The biggest thing I've been getting is the affirmation that this is needed and that this is actually helping people in their thought process. I think because it's just a year old, that's the downside, I guess, of working on in this field and this area of education is you really don't get a sense of what the successes are until you're about 4 or 5 years into the process, because once you actually help someone, they kind of have to implement the strategy. And when you're talking about high school and college, that can be 4, 5, 6
years down the road.
So considering I'm only a year into it, I think the best thing I can say is the biggest effect I'm seeing is people starting to recognize and get clarity on how to think about college and how to approach thinking about it. And ultimately, my goal is for homeschooling parents is I really want to help them just remove the fear of homeschooling high school, because that can be a real challenge for homeschooling parents sometimes. And so I really want to help them with that. So that's kind of the next big target I'm setting my sights for. Right now, I just wanted to focus in this last year on giving clarity to homeschooling students and parents on the college admissions process, and I think we've moved that way very effectively and very well. I've gotten a positive feedback in that regards, and so the next big step is taking the fear out of homeschooling high school.
That's awesome. So kind of to go along with that, taking the fear out, do you have any favorite books or resources that kind of go along with that you'd like to share? Other than your website, of course.
Read the website. It's great. In terms of just understanding and gaining perspective on learning, whether it's homeschooling or anything else, I think some of my favorite books have been to be reading biographies of great people and great individuals, and to look at their educational experience. Because
there's some really outside of the box type of options in those.
Yeah, and so some of my favorites in those areas are, I think the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin is really helpful in that. But David McCullough he's the guy who famously wrote the biography on John Adams, which they made that miniseries about. And David McCullough is widely regarded as one of America's great historians. And his biography on John Adams is great, but the biography I'm going to suggest in terms particularly of the value of being a self-starting learner is his biography on Theodore Roosevelt called Mornings on Horseback. And what you see when you look at the younger life of Theodore Roosevelt is this was a guy who had heavy asthma as a kid, so he didn't get to go through most of his growing up, he didn't get to go to a traditional school because of some of his health concerns. He had a lot of obstacles he had to overcome. But his family placed such a high value on education that he really learned to value learning in all areas of life. And he was really a highly educated individual, eventually went to the Ivy Leagues. Just fascinating story about how he grew and overcame obstacles and how he taught himself and learned and observed his world. And so I think in terms of just receiving encouragement about how education shapes us and helps us, it's a great read. Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin's a little shorter, and so that can be helpful as well. But what you see in these two biographies is just the fact that it's not about necessarily what school you go to. It's not about what degree you possess that determines your success in life, but it really is about how you approach learning and whether you see value in it and whether or not you understand how to do it well.
Yeah, kind of going back to that self-starting, to be a self-starter. So great resources. We talked about how it's difficult for him to pick a book because there's so many wonderful things out there. So you did a good job.
Should I go for something that's like educational, or should I go for something that's more helpful, like inspirational? What do I go for?
It definitely fits. So tell us about your long-term goals that you have for yourself and then the legacy that you hope to leave.
Well, I think learning has a lot to do with it, but I think when it comes to learning and when it comes to education, it serves dual purposes. It serves your individual purposes, and then it serves your community purposes. And what I mean by that is that when we think about learning and education, typically we're thinking in terms of, what it gets us personally. Is it going to get me a good job? Am I going to be able to get a good career? Do I enjoy this? But one of the things you pick up when it comes to learning is that it actually gives you the ability to help people. And so what I really long to do in terms of my long-term goals is not just help people understand what learning is, and I want to help people become lifelong learners, but I really want to help people understand that with that ability to learn comes a responsibility to serve your community and serve others with that knowledge and that ability to learn. And so you're not just serving yourself. And that would be the legacy I would want to leave is just this idea that you learn for yourself and for your community, and especially from an American context, since that's where we live here. But in an American context where we live in a democracy, that's part of what citizenship is you use education for not just your good, but for the good of your country, the good of your community, etc. So it's kind of a dual purpose for me.
That really does speak to. I've talked to a lot of different people about how important character development is in getting a good education, and we see that in America today is that we have so many people that are so focused on the carrot and the money and all of that, and we see what comes of that, and how important it is to maybe have a little bit more character and a little bit more service-minded behind that education.
Yeah, I would really love to see citizenship become a very noble concept for people, and that they see their education as contributing to that. So that's actually my PhD right now, is I'm studying political science at Claremont Graduate University. And so I want to teach in the field of political science as a way of helping students learn and become learners. But one of the things I definitely want to explore and research and write about is that idea of, okay, how does this help? How does this help us understand our responsibilities and our role as citizens?
Wow. Well, when you finish that, let me know. I'd love to get on and discuss those things of how we can help that. That sounds amazing. So
absolutely.
So before we say goodbye, do you have any final parting words of advice or maybe a favorite quote you'd like to share? And then give us your contact information, how our audience can get in touch with you.
Yeah. I would say my parting words of advice is definitely going back to the idea of learning, is that focus on what it means to learn and how to do it, and then you'll be able to learn just about any subject you want. You might not be a straight A student in every subject, but learning how to learn and learning how to do it well is where real education actually begins. As people want to get in touch with me, they can definitely go to College-Bound-Homeschooler.com. That's the website, and I have contact information there. And they can also follow me on Twitter at College-Bound-HS.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you coming on. This has been so fun talking to you.
Yeah, great talking with you too, Rebecca. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Tim and the College-Bound Homeschooler, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list and consider joining our program by going to the scheduling tab to become a fire starter today. Help support the podcast by making all your Amazon purchases through the free Amazon widget on our website. Also, sign up to receive 2 free audiobooks from Audible at theluminousmind.net. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, and now Pinterest. Get our audio content by subscribing on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. To help us grow, consider telling your friends about us. Leave us a review. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.